Theodore Wynn had been fixing engines since he was 14 years old, and in 31 years he had learned one thing that no one put in any manual. The machines always told the truth. People lied. Contracts lied. The look on a man's face when he shook your hand and said, "We're going to take care of you," that lied worst of all. But an engine made noise when something was wrong. It gave you warning. It never smiled and sent you home with nothing. He was 43. His daughter Bea was 7. Her mother had been gone for 4 years, taken fast by something that moved faster than any of them had been prepared for. And since then it had been the two of them in a house on Clement Street that always needed one more thing fixed than Theodore had time to fix it. He worked at Driscoll Auto and Fleet. He had worked there for 11 years. He was the best mechanic on the floor, and everyone who brought a vehicle in knew it. The regulars asked for him by name. The fleet managers from the hospital district requested him specifically for their emergency response vehicles. And even Boyd Driscoll himself had once said, at a Christmas party 4 years back, that Theodore was the kind of man a shop was built around. Boyd Driscoll had said that with a glass of bourbon in his hand and his arm around Theodore's shoulders, and Theodore had believed him, which was the last time he made that particular mistake. The morning everything changed, Theodore was under a 2019 cargo van whose transmission had been misdiagnosed twice by the other 2 mechanics on staff. He already knew what it was. He had known from the sound it made when the fleet coordinator drove it in. He did not say "I told you so" because he had learned that saying "I told you so" was a fast way to become the man nobody scheduled for overtime. He was thinking about Bea. She had a school play in 3 weeks, and she needed a specific shade of yellow for her costume, not just any yellow. She had explained very seriously, but the yellow of sunflowers specifically, not lemons, and he had promised her he would find it. He was thinking about that yellow, and whether the fabric store on Marbury Ave would have it when Boyd Driscoll's shoes appeared at the edge of the lift. "Theo, got a minute?" The conversation lasted 8 minutes. Theodore counted later, reconstructing it the way he reconstructed engine failures. Looking for the moment things began to go wrong, the first vibration, the first sign. Boyd Driscoll explained that the shop was restructuring, that the fleet contracts were moving to a centralized service provider, that the position, Theodore's position, the one he had held for 11 years, was being eliminated. Not performance-related, Boyd said. Just business. Theodore did not say anything for a long moment. Then he said, "Who's going to tell the hospital district their vehicles aren't getting checked by someone who actually knows them?" Boyd Driscoll said that would be handled. Theodore drove home, picked up Bea from her after-school program, made her a grilled cheese sandwich, and watched her eat it while she told him about the scene she had been assigned in the play. She was going to be a sunflower. She needed that specific yellow. "We'll find it," Theodore said. "You already said that," Bea said. "I know, I meant it both times." He did not tell her about the job until after she was asleep. He sat at the kitchen table and did the math, which was the same math he had been doing in his head since he left the shop. How long the savings lasted, what the truck payment looked like against unemployment, whether he could pick up work through the union hall fast enough to bridge the gap. The numbers were not good numbers. They were manageable numbers, if nothing else went wrong, if Bea didn't get sick, if the furnace held through the rest of winter. Numbers that required everything to go exactly right. Theodore was a man who understood that things rarely went exactly right. He planned accordingly. The job listing appeared on a Thursday. Theodore had been applying for 3 weeks by then. Fleet shops, dealerships, a manufacturing plant 40 minutes outside the city that would have meant Bea in before care before sunrise. He had not heard back from most of them. He had done 2 interviews that went nowhere, both times sensing the same thing. They wanted younger, they wanted cheaper, they wanted someone who would not come with 11 years of opinions about how things should be done. This listing was different. Temporary vehicle operator needed for executive transportation, minimum 5 years driving experience. Background check required. Discretion expected. Duration, 3-6 weeks. Competitive compensation. The pay listed was more per week than Theodore had been making at Driscoll. Not by a little. By enough that he read the number twice. He called the contact number. A man named Felix answered, professional and brief, and asked Theodore a series of questions that were oddly specific. Not just about driving history, but about how he handled unfamiliar routes. Whether he had experience with high-traffic urban environments. Whether he was comfortable with variable hours. Theodore answered all of it directly. Felix told him a background check would be run and he would hear back within 48 hours. He heard back in 6. He was hired as a temporary driver for Solara Group, a real estate development firm. He would be driving their chief operating officer for the duration of a large-scale contract negotiation. Her regular driver had taken emergency family leave and they needed someone immediately. He would report Monday morning at 7:15 to a parking structure on Whitmore Street. Theodore told Bee's babysitter he might need her earlier than usual starting Monday. Then he pressed his good jacket, the one he had bought for interviews, and laid it over the chair in his bedroom so he wouldn't forget it. He did not yet know who he would be driving. He did not know that Monday morning, pulling into the Whitmore Street garage in his personal truck before transferring to the company vehicle, a dark gray executive sedan that was maintained well but had an exhaust note he already wanted to adjust. That the next 5 weeks were going to require a different kind of attention than anything he had brought to a job before. Irene Solano was 38 years old and had been the COO of Solara Group for 2 years, which meant she had spent 2 years being the second most powerful person in a company that people assumed was run entirely by men. She had stopped counting the number of times someone at a site visit had introduced themselves to the man standing next to her first. She had stopped counting, but she had not stopped noticing. She came out of the building at 7:19 on Monday morning, 4 minutes late, and she was already on the phone. She gave Theodore a single glance, efficient, assessing, the kind of look that filed you quickly, and got into the back seat without interrupting her call. She was talking about permitting delays. She was not asking questions so much as issuing corrections. Theodore pulled out of the garage and into the flow of morning traffic. She finished the call 8 minutes later, a brief silence. Then, "You're not Eduardo." "No," Theodore said. "I'm filling in while he's out. Theodore Wynn." Another silence. Not hostile, more like adjustment. He got the sense she operated best when things were exactly where she expected them. "Irene Solano," she said. "I know," he said. "Felix briefed me." She said nothing to that. He navigated the next 4 blocks. The route Felix had given him was standard. He had driven it twice the night before to time the lights. "You took Claremont instead of 5th, she said. "5th backs up at the Hensley intersection this time of morning," Theodore said. "Claremont adds 2 blocks but saves about 7 minutes. Another silence. Different texture than the first. "Eduardo takes 5th, she said. "Eduardo might not know about the Hensley light," Theodore said. "It's been worse since the construction started last month." She looked at him in the rearview mirror for a moment. Then she went back to her phone. They arrived at the building 3 minutes ahead of schedule. She did not comment on this, but the next morning, she did not question the route. The weeks developed a rhythm. Theodore learned her schedule the way he learned an engine, not from the manual but from observation, from the way the day ran when things were working, versus when something was slightly off. She had a standing call at 8 that she took in the car on Tuesdays and Thursdays. She preferred silence before 9. She read documents on her tablet during longer drives and could not be interrupted then without visible effort on her part to mask the irritation. She was not unkind. She was simply entirely occupied, at all times, with what was in front of her. He brought coffee on the 3rd day, from the place on Durant, not the lobby cart, without being asked. He had noticed she threw away the lobby coffee after 2 sips on the first 2 mornings. She looked at the cup he handed her, then at him, and said nothing, which he was beginning to understand was her version of thank you. On Thursday of the second week, a document she had been reviewing on the tablet made her set the tablet down and look out the window for 30 seconds. Long enough that Theodore noticed. When she picked it up again, she was reading the same page she'd been on before. He said nothing. Whatever it was not his business. It became his business on a Wednesday. He had pulled to the curb outside the building on Hanover Street, a planning office, a routine stop for document pickup, and waited with the engine idling while Irene went inside. Standard procedure. She was usually in and out in under 10 minutes. She was inside for 22. When she came out, she had the same leather portfolio she'd gone in with, but something in the way she held it was different, closed too tightly, fingers gripping the edge. She got in the back seat and did not take out her phone, which was unusual. After 2 blocks, she said the site permits for the Alderman project were approved 6 weeks ago. Okay, Theodore said. I approved them. I reviewed the environmental assessments myself. The documentation was complete. A pause. Except it wasn't the same documentation I reviewed. He waited. Someone in the approval chain swapped the assessments. The versions in the city's system don't match what I signed off on. She said it the way someone says a thing out loud in order to confirm that it is real. If that project breaks ground on those specs, there are 3 residential water lines that haven't been properly rerouted. Theodore kept his eyes on the road. He said, "Who processed the submission to the city?" She was quiet for a moment. "That's the right question. People who swap documents," Theodore said, not looking away from traffic. "Usually watch your face when you read them. To see if you notice." She looked at him in the rearview mirror. "The man at the front desk," she said slowly, kept looking up from his computer. "Yeah," Theodore said. They drove the next 6 blocks in silence. He could feel her thinking, fast, structured, the way she did everything. "I need to go back to the office," she said. "Not the Solara building. The satellite office on Mercer." "Understood," Theodore said, and changed course. What Theodore did not tell her was that he had noticed something 10 days earlier. It was a small thing. The kind of thing that only registered if you were the type of person who paid attention to everything, because inattention, in his experience, was how things broke. A man in a gray coat had been standing across from the Whitmore garage on 3 separate mornings. Not the same spot each time. One morning by the newsstand, once near the crosswalk, once in the recessed doorway of the dry cleaner. Different positions. Same man. Same gray coat. Theodore had run plates for 11 years. He understood surveillance patterns the way he understood engine timing. Not from training, from repetition. He had not said anything because he had no evidence. He had only a pattern, and a pattern was only worth something when it connected to something else. On the Thursday of the 3rd week, it connected to something else. He had taken Irene to a lunch meeting at a restaurant on Clement, a different Clement Street than his own, on the other side of the city, which gave him a strange feeling he did not examine too closely. While she was inside, he had walked the block in both directions out of habit. The gray coat was not there, but parked 2 cars behind the sedan was a vehicle he had seen before. A blue Denali, partial plate ending in 4R, that had appeared behind them on Claremont twice in the past week and once on the Hanover Street run. He photographed the plate with his phone. He said nothing about it to Irene. That evening, he asked his neighbor Rudy, a retired city employee who had done permit work for 20 years and knew everyone who had ever moved paper through the planning offices, if the name Fletcher Norwood meant anything to him. Fletcher Norwood was the name on the placard at the front desk of the city planning office where Irene had picked up the documents. Rudy looked at him for a moment. "How do you know that name?" "Just a name I came across," Theodore said. Rudy said that Fletcher Norwood had left the city planning office under quiet circumstances about 3 years ago. The kind of quiet circumstances that meant something happened that no one put in writing. He had resurfaced, Rudy understood, doing some kind of consulting. For whom, Rudy didn't know. Theodore thanked him and went home. Bea was already asleep. He sat in the kitchen and thought about permit fraud and surveillance, and the distance between a mechanic who had been laid off and a COO who didn't yet know that someone had been watching her movements for at least 3 weeks. He thought about Bia. He thought about the yellow of sunflowers specifically. Then he picked up his phone and sent Felix a message. Need to speak with you before Monday, not about scheduling. Felix met him Saturday morning. When Theodore laid out what he had, the man in the gray coat, the Denali, the plate, the Norwood connection. Felix listened without interrupting. Felix was the kind of man who understood information the way Theodore understood engines. He knew what mattered. When Theodore finished, Felix said, "You documented all of this. Photographs, dates, time." Theodore said, "I kept a log." Felix was quiet for a moment. "Mrs. Solano needs to know." "I know," Theodore said. "I wanted to go through you first. I didn't want her to think I'd been running background on the people around her without cause." Felix looked at him. "Had you been?" "I noticed things," Theodore said. "I didn't go looking for them. But once I noticed, I wrote them down." Felix said he would arrange a meeting Monday morning before the first appointment. Theodore drove home. He stopped at the fabric store on Marbury Ave on the way. They had the yellow, not just yellow, but the specific warm gold of sunflowers, exactly what Bia had described to him with such seriousness. He bought 2 yards of it and folded it carefully in the passenger seat. The Monday morning meeting lasted 40 minutes. Theodore sat across from Irene Solano in a conference room he had never been in a building he had only ever seen from the outside, and he laid out everything the same way he had for Felix. Methodical, sequential, no embellishment. She listened the way she did everything, completely. When he finished, she said, "How long have you been doing this?" "Writing things down, noticing things," she said. He considered how to answer that. "I was a mechanic for 11 years, he said. "The job was mostly paying attention. Patterns in how things run, deviations from baseline. I just never stopped doing it." She looked at him for a long moment. He noticed she had the same expression she'd had when he told her about the Claremont route, that first morning, the recalibration. "Fletcher Norwood," she said. "He's connected to someone on our board. That would make sense of the document swap." Theodore said, "It would make sense of several things." She stood up, which he understood meant the meeting was over. Then she stopped. "Your daughter, Bia?" Felix mentioned she has a school play. He was quiet for a moment, surprised. "In 2 weeks. Take the afternoon," she said. "Whatever you need for the costume. I already found the fabric," he said. Something shifted in her expression, brief, but real. "Of course you did," she said. What followed was not simple, and Theodore would not have expected it to be. The board member connected to Fletcher Norwood was a man named Garrett Pressfield. Garrett Pressfield, who had been on the Solara board for 6 years, who had shaken hands with Theodore once in a lobby without looking at him, who had apparently been routing competitor interests through a third-party consulting arrangement for at least 18 months. It was not Theodore who unraveled it. He provided what he had observed. Irene and her attorney and an external audit firm unraveled the rest. That was their work, not his, and he understood the difference. What he did on the Thursday before it came apart publicly was drive Irene to a meeting she did not put on the calendar. A quiet building on the east side, not the kind of address that appeared in business filings. She did not tell him what the meeting was. He did not ask. He parked, he waited, he watched the block in both directions. The gray coat did not appear. The blue Denali did not appear. When she came back out 45 minutes later, she looked like someone who had set something down that she had been carrying for a very long time. She got in the car. She said, "The Alderman project will be suspended pending a full environmental review. The correct documentation will be resubmitted." "Good," Theodore said. 3 residential neighborhoods won't have their water infrastructure compromised. "Also good," he said. She almost smiled. He had come to recognize the shape of it, a small motion at the corner of her mouth that she rarely let complete itself. He pulled out into traffic. The city moved past the windows in that particular way it had on clear afternoons. when the light came through at an angle that made everything look briefly like it was worth something. "Theodore," she said. "Yeah, why didn't you say anything sooner? About the surveillance. You had the photographs for 2 weeks. He thought about this. I had observations," he said, "not evidence. I didn't want to alarm you based on something I couldn't yet connect." She was quiet for a moment. Most people would have either said nothing or overreacted. "Most people don't spend 11 years listening to engines," he said. "You learn to know the difference between a noise that means something and a noise that means something is about to go wrong." She looked at him in the rear view. "Eduardo is coming back next week." "I know," Theodore said. "I've spoken to Felix about a different arrangement," she said. "There's a vehicle operations and fleet management position being created. It would be a permanent role. It would involve more than driving," he kept his eyes on the road, "more than driving DABE site inspections, fleet maintenance oversight. We have 11 vehicles that I'm fairly certain haven't been properly serviced in 2 years. A pause. "You'd have an opinion about that. I would have several opinions about that," he said. She did almost smile again. "The salary is considerably more than what we're paying for the temporary arrangement." "B's school play is in 4 days, Theodore said. "I know," Irene said. "Take the morning. The offer doesn't expire." He took the morning. He sat in the 3rd row of a school gymnasium that smelled like floor wax and old sneakers, and he watched his daughter walk out in a yellow sunflower costume. The right yellow, the specific warm gold she had described to him so seriously, and deliver 4 lines in a clear, steady voice that was so much like her mother's voice that Theodore had to look at the floor for a moment to collect himself. The woman sitting next to him, whose son was playing a bumblebee, leaned over and said, "Is that yours, the sunflower?" "Yeah," Theodore said. "She's wonderful," the woman said. "I know," Theodore said. Bea spotted him from the stage after her lines and gave him the smallest possible wave, the kind designed to be subtle because she was 7 and already understood that waving too big at your father during a school play was not the done thing. He gave her the same wave back, small, deliberate. Just for her, he called Felix that afternoon. He accepted the position on a Tuesday, sitting at his kitchen table while Bea did her homework across from him, and the yellow fabric was still folded on the counter where he'd left it when he brought it home. Because he hadn't needed to use it all, and he'd thought maybe she'd want it for something else someday. Some other project, some other thing that required that particular color. He had been a man who fixed things that other people couldn't figure out. He had been laid off for knowing too much and costing too little to get rid of. He had spent 3 weeks driving a woman who ran half a city's development pipeline and watching, quietly, while the machinery around her tried to work against her. He had not announced himself. He had not explained himself. He had simply done what he always did, paid attention, kept records, and told the truth when asked. The engine had been making noise. He had listened to it. That was all. Bea looked up from her homework. "Dad, what are you smiling about?" "Nothing," Theodore said. She looked at him the way she sometimes did, the same assessing look her mother used to give him, the one that meant "I don't believe you, but I'm going to let it go." "Okay," she said, and went back to her homework. The house on Clement Street still needed 3 things fixed. It would probably need a 4th thing by spring. Theodore made a note of it in the small notebook he kept by the door, the same notebook where he had written down license plates and times and the position of a man in a gray coat, and then he closed it and put it back up and sat across from his daughter while the evening came in through the windows and the city settled into itself the way cities do, without asking permission, without announcing what came next.